In the 5th year of the One Earth regime, peace had a texture. It was the sterile, frictionless hum of a surveillance drone gliding between metropolis skyscrapers. It was the crisp, synthesized voice from public speakers announcing curfew, a voice devoid of warmth or inflection. It was the unnerving stillness of a sky no longer scarred by alien invasions or the chaotic energy of a supervillain's rampage. This was Superman's peace, a perfect, beautiful, and suffocating cage. The wars were over. The villains were lobotomized, imprisoned, or ash. Hope, justice, and the American way had been replaced by order, obedience, and the global way. From his seat in a lecture hall at Metropolis University, Light Yagami could appreciate the result, if not the method. The world was undeniably safer, but it was not yet pure. The rot was still there, hiding in the shadows cast by the Man of Steel's monolithic authority. This world of gods and tyrants was a fascinating problem. It was a grand equation of power, fear, and human fallibility, and Light, the most brilliant student of his generation, saw the flaws in its construction. Superman had bludgeoned the world into submission, but he hadn't changed its soul. Petty crime persisted. Corrupt officials within the regime itself skimmed resources. Insurgents, terrorists who called themselves freedom fighters, still bombed infrastructure in the dead of night. The system was incomplete. Superman was a hammer, but the world's evils required a scalpel. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. Hope shines brightest in the darkest night. As the lecture on post-crisis jurisprudence droned on, something caught Light's eye. A flicker of black against the pristine blue sky. It wasn't a bird, nor one of the regime's patrol bots. It was small, tumbling end over end, falling with an unnerving lack of purpose. It landed softly on the manicured lawn just outside the window. A simple black notebook. In a world where cosmic cubes and magical amulets could rewrite reality, the sheer mundanity of the object was what made it so compelling. After class, driven by a curiosity he rarely indulged, Light retrieved it. The cover was plain, but the words embossed in white were not. Death Note. Inside, the rules were laid out in neat English script. The human whose name is written in this note shall die. Light's first reaction was not disbelief, but cold, analytical assessment. He lived in a universe where a man from a dead planet could move worlds, and an Amazonian princess wielded a lasso that compelled truth. A magic notebook that killed people was hardly the most outlandish concept. It was, however, a testable hypothesis. That evening, in his meticulously clean apartment, Light turned on the news. The regime-controlled network was reporting on a holdout arms dealer in the Gotham exclusion zone, a man named Jack the Grin Napier, no relation to the long-dead clown, who had been supplying the insurgency with salvage weaponry. He was a nobody, a cockroach the regime hadn't bothered to stamp out yet. His face was clearly displayed on the screen. Light's heart beat with the calm, steady rhythm of a researcher beginning an experiment. He uncapped a pen, his handwriting precise. Jack Napier. The rule stated that if the cause of death is not specified, the target would simply die of a heart attack. Perfect. Deniable. He wrote, heart attack, and closed the notebook. He set a timer for 40 seconds. The world did not shake. No lightning split the sky. There was only the quiet tick of his clock and the sound of his own breathing. When the timer chimed, nothing had happened. A flicker of disappointment, quickly suppressed. It was likely a prank, a morbid piece of theater. He turned back to his studies, the notebook sitting on his desk like a failed experiment. 20 minutes later, a news bulletin interrupted the scheduled programming. The anchor, a woman with a practiced regime-approved smile, announced the sudden death of Jack Napier. He had reportedly collapsed in his warehouse hideout, clutching his chest. The cause of death, pending an autopsy the regime would never actually perform, was a massive coronary event. Light stared at the screen, his face a mask of calm, but inside his mind was a supernova of realization. It was real. The power to judge, to execute, to purify was sitting on his desk. It was a power beyond Superman's brute force, beyond Batman's fetal crusade. It was silent. It was absolute. It was perfect. This was the tool that could complete the equation. This was the scalpel. Well, it's been a while since a human has picked one of these up without screaming. The voice was a gravelly rasp, layered with an ancient, bored amusement. It came from the corner of the room, from a spindly, grotesque figure that seemed to absorb the light around it. It was a monstrosity of limbs and leathery skin, with a rictus grin and bulbous yellow eyes. A demon, a monster, an alien. In this universe, it could have been any of them. Light Yagami did not flinch. He simply turned in his chair, his expression of mild annoyance rather than terror. And you are? The creature crunched on a bright red apple, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. Ryuk. I'm a Shinigami. The death note you've got there, it's mine. Or, well, it was. Now it's yours. Have fun with it. So the rules are all true, Light stated. his mind already racing past the shock of the creature's appearance and on to the strategic implications. "You're the god of death who dropped it." One of them, Ryuk chuckled, "And I'm not here to help you or stop you. I'm just here to watch. I was bored. Your world looked interesting. All these people in capes flying around, punching each other, and one big one who decided to punch everyone. Seemed like a good place for a little chaos." Light looked from the Shinigami to the notebook. Chaos was not his intention. This tool would not be used for chaos. It would be used to bring about the final perfect order that Superman, with all his power, was too sentimental and too public to achieve. The Man of Steel ruled through fear of his presence. Light would rule through fear of an unseen, omniscient judge. He would become a ghost in the machine, a whisper in the dark, a god for a world that had mistaken a powerful alien for a savior. He would be the unseen hand that cleansed the planet not only of criminals, but of the corrupt, the lazy, the rebellious, anyone who threatened his vision of a perfect society. His name would be whispered in fear and reverence. They would call him Kira.
The purge began not with a thunderclap, but with a whisper. From his apartment, surrounded by the glow of monitors, Light Yagami became the world's most prolific and invisible serial killer. He was meticulous, starting small to test the parameters of his new power. He cross-referenced insurgency propaganda broadcasts with facial recognition software scraped from pre-regime social media. He devoured news archives, finding the names and faces of organized crime figures the regime had deemed too insignificant to crush. He was curating the world's obituary column, his pen moving with the detached precision of a surgeon. A Belgian arms smuggler supplying Catwoman's underground network collapsed while inspecting a weapons crate. A corrupt regime quartermaster in Midway City, known for selling food rations on the black market, choked on his own breath during a lavish meal. A cell of insurgent bombers in Kondak, their faces captured for a split second on a security camera, were found dead in their safe house, all from simultaneous, inexplicable heart attacks. There was no calling card, no grand declaration. The world was simply becoming cleaner. The changes were subtle, lost in the noise of the global police state. A slight downturn in gang violence in the Gotham exclusion zone, a sudden disruption in the insurgency supply lines. Isolated incidents, easily dismissed. But some people were paid to notice the patterns in the noise. Deep beneath the scarred earth of what was once a Wayne Enterprises research outpost, Batman watched the data stream across a flickering holographic display. The Batcave was a tomb of memories and a war room for a losing fight. Here, surrounded by the ghosts of his family, Bruce Wayne fought his unwinnable war. His network was a shattered remnant of its former glory, but Oracle, from her own shielded bunker, was still the most powerful information broker on the planet. "Another one, Bruce." Barbara Gordon's voice, tinged with a familiar weariness, echoed through the cavern. "Harley's scout in the Narrows found him this morning. The regime patrol that found the body is calling it a heart attack." On the main screen, a file appeared. A young man, barely 20, face pale and lifeless. "That's the 5th insurgent in 2 weeks to die of natural causes." Bruce's voice was a low growl, more gravel than man. "The regime doesn't do natural. When they want us dead, they send a Superman loyalist to break down the door. They make examples. This is quiet. This is wrong." He pulled up a global map, dozens of blinking red dots populating its surface over the last month. He filtered the data, his fingers flying across the console. The victims were a strange mix. His own people, low-level criminals, even a few notoriously abusive regime officers. They had nothing in common. No geographical link, no shared associates, no single organization. "What connects them, Babs?" "That's what's driving me crazy," she replied, the sound of furious typing coming through the comms. "I've run every algorithm. The only common denominator is that every victim had their name and face publicly exposed within 72 hours of their death. News reports, wanted posters, security leaks, it's the only thread." Batman froze. He brought up the files of the dead regime officers. One had been profiled in a puff piece for the regime's propaganda network. The other had his face plastered over a leaked file from the insurgency. He cross-referenced it with the Gotham criminals. All of them had been recently arrested and processed, their mugshots becoming a matter of public record. His own people had appeared, faces masked but names mentioned, in intercepted communications. He leaned in closer to the screen, the cold light reflecting off the white lenses of his cowl. Poison was out. The autopsies, the few they could acquire, were clean. A biological agent was possible, but the diversity of the victims made it unlikely. A directed energy weapon? Too noisy, and it would leave a trace. He stripped away the impossibilities one by one, until only a terrifying truth remained. "He's not touching them," Bruce whispered, the realization dawning on him like a black sun. "He's not using a weapon that can be traced because the weapon isn't physical.
All he needs is a name and a face. Bruce, that's insane, Barbara said, her voice strained. That's magic, or something else entirely. In a world where men fly, it's not insane. It's a new variable. He stood up, pacing before the giant screen. On the internet, on the dark forums where whispers of rebellion still survived, a name had begun to circulate for this phantom judge. They called him Kira, a bastardization of the English word for killer. To the downtrodden masses living under Superman's boot, Kira was a savior, a righteous spirit punishing the wicked that even the regime overlooked. They saw the criminals and corrupt officers dying, and they cheered. They didn't see the dead insurgents. They didn't see the threat. Bruce did. Superman had enforced his peace with a fist, a public display of overwhelming power. This Kira was a cancer, spreading silently. It was a philosophy of death as a solution, the very same poison that had created the regime. Kira was a tyrant for the people, and that made him infinitely more dangerous. He was a symbol that could offer a different kind of order, a rival ideology to Superman's. And he was a direct threat to the insurgency, picking off its members with impunity. Kira, Batman said, testing the name. He's targeting anyone whose identity is compromised. He's making us ghosts, forcing us deeper into the shadows. He turned to the display case that held the tattered uniform of a fallen Robin, Jason. He had lost a son to a monster who killed with a crowbar. Now he faced a monster who killed with a pen. One god had broken the world with his strength, a god Bruce knew how to fight. This new one, this ghost, was poisoning it with a whisper, and a whisper was infinitely harder to catch. The game had changed. The world's greatest detective had a new case. Find a killer who was everywhere and nowhere. A killer whose only weapon was knowledge. The hunt for Kira had begun.
The name Kira spread not like a wildfire, but like a virus. It infected the global consciousness through encrypted forums, whispered conversations, and anonymous data drops that Oracle struggled to trace. To a world suffocated by the regime's sterile peace, Kira was a breath of intoxicating, terrifying air. He was a folk hero forged in the digital ether, a god for the godless. People began to see the patterns. They noticed the human traffickers found dead in their port containers, the slumlords discovered motionless in their penthouse suites, the serial predators who had evaded the regime's notice suddenly dropping dead on street corners. These were not the actions of the regime, which favored public, brutal displays of power. This was something else. It was precise, clean, and seemingly righteous. Light Yagami watched this burgeoning mythos from his apartment, a faint, satisfied smile gracing his lips. He was no longer just a student with a supernatural weapon. He was the architect of a new global theology. His power was not in the notebook itself, but in the idea it represented, that no evil could hide. He decided it was time for the ghost to speak. He needed to seize control of the narrative, to transform the whispers into a doctrine. He used a series of cascading proxy servers, routing his signal through a dozen different countries, hijacking the global broadcast system for precisely 60 seconds. Every screen on the planet, from the massive jumbotrons in regime-controlled Times Square to the cracked smartphones in the slums of Rio, flickered to black. Then a single stylized K appeared, shimmering in a gothic crimson font. A synthesized voice, cold and devoid of human emotion, filled the sudden global silence. You have seen my works. You have given me a name, Kira. I accept it. For too long, this world has suffered under the illusion of peace. Order has been imposed by a flawed god who fears his own power. He imprisons evil, but he does not erase it. He punishes the symptom, but he does not cure the disease. I am the cure. The voice was measured, hypnotic. I am the judge this world has been crying for. I require no armies, no satellites, no fear-mongering. All I require is a name and a face. To the wicked, to the corrupt, to those who would harm the innocent, know that I am watching. Your identity is your death warrant. But to the good, the just, the righteous people of this earth, you have nothing to fear. I will build a new world, a utopia free from the shadow of crime.
I will be the god of this new world. The broadcast ended as abruptly as it began. 60 seconds of airtime that shattered the foundations of the regime's power. In the Fortress of Solitude, now a cold, sterile command center for the One Earth government, Superman watched the lingering K on his monitor. His expression was one of profound, burning fury. For 5 years he had bled, fought, and killed to bring peace to this planet. He had sacrificed his reputation, his friendships, his very soul to create a world where no one would have to suffer the loss he had. He was the shepherd, and the people of Earth were his flock, and now some unseen insect was claiming to be their god. Who is he? Superman's voice was a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through the crystalline structure of the fortress. Wonder Woman stood beside him, her arms crossed, her expression a mask of warrior's resolve. No, Superman countered, turning from the screen. His eyes glowed with a faint crimson heat. This is arrogant. This Kira believes he has a moral authority greater than mine. The thought was so offensive, so utterly blasphemous, it was almost incomprehensible. He had brought an end to war. He had dismantled every army on the planet. He had created a system where humanity was safe from itself, and this Kira had the audacity to call it an illusion. Raven, a silent shadow near the fortress's central computer, spoke, her voice a soft monotone that cut through the tension. His power is not technological. I have been extending my senses, searching for the psychic residue of these deaths. There is a void, an unnatural severance of the soul from the body. It feels ancient, magical. This gave Superman pause. Magic. The one thing besides kryptonite that could truly harm him. The only variable he could never fully control. It explains the untraceable nature of the killings. Then he is a sorcerer, she concluded. A coward who strikes from the shadows. He's more than that, Superman said, his gaze fixed on the image of the Earth floating in the center of the room. He's a rival. He's offering a different path to order, one that doesn't require my fist. He's undermining my authority not with force, but with an idea. He's making people believe that they don't need me to protect them, that some phantom can do it better. The broadcast had done more than just declare Kira's existence. It had drawn a line in the sand. There could not be two gods on one planet. One offered peace through absolute power. The other offered purity through absolute judgment. Superman saw Kira not as a killer of criminals, but as a direct challenge to his throne. This wasn't a criminal to be stopped. It was a competitor to be eliminated. He turned to his most trusted lieutenants. Find him, he commanded, his voice dropping the last vestiges of Clark Kent and embracing the cold finality of the High Counselor. I want his name. I want his face. I want to look this god in the eye before I crush him. The silent war for the soul of the planet had just become a public rivalry. In one corner stood the Man of Steel, the alien who had conquered the world to save it. In the other, a phantom named Kira, a human who was promising to perfect it. And in the middle, caught between two aspiring gods, was humanity. Awaiting, continue.
The rain in the Gotham exclusion zone didn't just fall, it clung. It was a thick, industrial mist that smelled of ozone and old ash, a constant reminder of the day the Joker had turned Metropolis into a graveyard and fractured the world's soul. Batman stood atop a rusted gargoyle, a shadow among shadows, watching a flickering neon sign for a shuttered pharmacy. This was his element, the grime, the silence, the detective's grind. But the prey he was hunting tonight didn't leave fingerprints or shell casings. He was hunting a ghost who sat behind a desk, perhaps hundreds of miles away, wielding a power that made the Batmobile look like a toy. He's arrogant, Barbara, Bruce said into his comms, his voice barely a breath against the wind. The broadcast was a tactical error. He wanted the world to know his name, but in doing so, he gave me his profile. A profile of a god? Barbara's voice crackled with digital interference. The regime's analysts are calling him a cosmic entity. Superman's already looking into the Phantom Zone records, thinking it's an escaped Kryptonian criminal using some kind of telepathic resonance. Superman sees every problem as a physical threat to be punched, Batman countered, his eyes scanning the street below through multispectral lenses. But look at the timing of the deaths. Look at the language of the broadcast. I am the judge. I am the cure. This isn't the language of an ancient deity. It's the language of a young, brilliant mind. Someone who has spent their life watching the world's flaws and finally found the means to fix them. He's a student of order. He's a perfectionist. And he's local.
Batman had narrowed the broadcast origin. It hadn't come from a satellite or a hidden fortress. It had been injected into the Metropolis Central Hub through a series of high-level academic servers. Kira wasn't a sorcerer in a tower. He was likely a citizen of Superman's utopia. I'm setting the trap, Babs. If he's who I think he is, he won't be able to resist. In a high-security regime detention center on the outskirts of Gotham, a man sat in a sterile cell. His name was Arthur Evans, a mid-level bureaucrat within the One Earth government who had been caught embezzling funds meant for the Gotham Reconstruction Project. To the public, he was a traitor to Superman's cause. To Kira, he was exactly the kind of rot that needed to be excised. But Arthur Evans didn't exist. He was a deep cover fabrication, a digital ghost created by Oracle. His face was a composite of several deceased individuals, rendered in high definition across every regime news cycle for the last 6 hours. Batman watched from the rafters of the detention center's control room. He had rigged the heart rate monitors of every prisoner to his own gauntlet. If Arthur died, Bruce would have the exact second of the kill. He had synchronized the Gotham Central clock with the Metropolis hub. He was looking for the latency, the tiny millisecond delay between the information being processed and the judgment being dealt. In Metropolis, Light Yagami sat in his dorm room, the death note open before him. Ryuk hovered near the ceiling, gnawing on a core. "You're taking the bait, Lido," the Shinigami chuckled. "You really think this Evans guy is worth the risk?" "It's not a risk if I've already won, Ryuk," Light whispered, his pen hovering over the paper. He had seen the news reports. He had seen the traitor's face. In Light's mind, Batman was the only true obstacle left. Superman was a blunt instrument, a king who could be manipulated or outlasted. But Batman was a detective. He was the only one who looked for the hand behind the curtain. By killing Evans, I prove I can reach inside Superman's own prisons. I assert my dominance over the regime's security. And if Batman is watching, he'll see that I am omnipresent. Light wrote the name, Arthur Evans, heart attack. Back in Gotham, Batman's gauntlet vibrated. A flatline. "Time of death, 22:04:12, Bruce said, his voice cold. "Oracle, did you get it?" "Tracing the packet burst now." "Bruce, the latency is consistent with the terminal in the Metropolis University District. It's not a magic ritual, it's an input. He's using a physical interface to trigger the deaths. Kira is a person, Bruce, a human being with a keyboard, or a pen." Batman felt a grim sense of satisfaction, though it was hollow. He had humanized the monster, but he hadn't caught him. He's in Metropolis. He's young. He has access to high-level data. Start cross-referencing every honor student with a background in criminal justice or philosophy. Look for the outliers, the ones who are too perfect. Suddenly, the monitors in the control center flickered. A new image appeared, overriding Batman's feed. It wasn't the Crimson K. It was a live feed of the Batcave, or rather a grainy thermal image of the Wayne Manor ruins. "You're looking for me, detective," the synthesized voice of Kira echoed through the detention center. "But you're looking for a man. I told you, I am the cure. You hide behind a mask because you fear the judgment of your peers. You fear that if the world knew your name, your crusade would end. But I don't need to see your face to know your soul." Batman felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Gotham rain. Kira wasn't just killing, he was counter-investigating. "You call Superman a tyrant," Kira continued, the voice filled with a chilling youthful arrogance. "But you are the one who allows the rot to persist. You catch the criminals and put them in cells, only for them to break out and kill again. You are an enabler of chaos. I am the end of the cycle. I know you're in that building, Batman. I know you're watching that heart rate monitor. Tell me, does the heart of a hero beat differently when it knows it's being hunted?" "He's baiting me, Babs," Bruce whispered, his eyes narrowing. "He knows I'm close, so he's trying to force me into a mistake. He's trying to make me show my hand." "Bruce, get out of there," Barbara urged. "If he can hack the regime's news, he can hack your location. He might not have your name yet, but he's narrowing the field." Batman didn't move. He looked at the empty cell where Arthur Evans lay dead. He saw the future Kira wanted, a world where everyone lived in terror of their own identity, where the act of being known was a death sentence. It was a tyranny of the mind, far more total than Superman's tyranny of the body. "I'm not leaving," Bruce said, his voice hardening into steel. "He thinks he's playing a game of chess. He thinks he's the player and I'm the piece. But he forgot one thing." He reached into his belt and pulled out a small, lead-lined encrypted drive. "He needs a name and a face. I've spent 20 years making sure the world has neither. He can talk all he wants, but as long as the mask stays on, he's just a boy with a book, and I'm the man who hides in the dark." But even as he said it, he knew the stakes had escalated. Kira wasn't just a threat to the criminals. He was a threat to the very concept of the secret identity. In a world of superheroes, a name was the ultimate vulnerability, and Kira was the ultimate predator. The hunt was no longer just about justice. It was about survival.
The watchtower hung in the silent vacuum of space, a silver needle threaded through the velvet black of the cosmos. From its observation deck, the Earth didn't look like a battlefield. It looked like a marble of swirling blues and whites, fragile and quiet. But Superman, standing with his hands clasped behind his back, could hear the heartbeat of every person on that planet. He could hear the whispers of Kira in the back alleys of Bloodhaven and the prayers offered to the new god in the ruins of Central City. It was a rhythmic, persistent thrum of dissent that felt like a physical weight on his shoulders. For 5 years, he had been the ultimate authority. Now he was being treated like a preamble. "He's efficient, Cal," Wonder Woman said, her golden armor reflecting the cold light of distant stars. She stepped up beside him, her gaze fixed on the glowing curve of the horizon. "In the last 48 hours, crime in the metropolis sectors has dropped by an additional 12%. The black markets are closing. The people aren't just obeying our laws anymore, they're afraid to even think of breaking them." "They aren't afraid of us, Diana," Superman replied, his voice a low, vibrating hum. "They're afraid of the shadow. They think Kira is more pervasive than I am. They think he sees what my X-ray vision misses." He turned to her, his eyes uncharacteristically tired. "He's doing what I couldn't. He's removing the choice to do evil, but he's doing it without my permission." This was the crux of the High Counselor's agony. He had spent years justifying his tyranny as a necessary evil to preserve life. Kira was proving that you could preserve order by simply ending the lives of the unworthy with a flick of a wrist. It was a purer form of the regime's own philosophy, stripped of the messy public executions and the collateral damage of superpowered brawls. "If we cannot find him to execute him, we must find him to employ him," Diana stated, her warrior's pragmatism cutting through his contemplation. "Imagine the regime with Kira's power at its disposal. No more insurgency hideouts to storm, no more protracted sieges of rebel cities. We simply feed him the names of the dissenters, and the rebellion dies in its sleep. Batman becomes a non-issue." Superman considered this. It was a tempting, poisonous thought. The struggle with Batman had cost him everything: his parents' respect, his best friend's life, and the love of the people. If Kira could end the war with a notebook, wasn't that the ultimate realization of the peace he had promised Lois? "Raven," Superman called out. From the shifting shadows of the deck, the daughter of Trigon materialized. Her cloak was a shroud of deepest indigo, her face pale and distant. "He is not a cosmic being. He is small, mortal, but he is tethered to something ancient, something that feeds on the souls he sends to the dark. Can you track that tether? In a world of billions, it is a needle in a hayfield of spirits, but he is active. Every time he uses the power, the void flares. He is in Metropolis. He moves among the elite. He has a mind that seeks to blend in by being perfect." Superman nodded. "Take Wonder Woman. Go to Metropolis. Don't go as conquerors. Go as recruiters. If this Kira truly believes in order, he will see the logic in joining the only force capable of maintaining it. Tell him the regime offers him a seat at the table of gods. Tell him he can be my hand of justice." His eyes flared with a sudden, sharp heat. "And if he refuses, bring me his head. I won't have a rival deity in my city." Down in the gleaming heart of Metropolis, Light Yagami was feeling the walls close in. He sat in a crowded campus cafe, his laptop open to a mundane research paper on socioeconomics, but his mind was mapping the city's defensive grid. He had seen the regime's increased patrols. He had seen the way the drones lingered over the university district. He knew Batman was close to a profile, and now he knew the regime was looking for him not just as a criminal, but as a resource. "You're popular, Lighto," Ryuk said, lazily floating invisible above a group of sorority girls. "The big guy in the cape wants to be your best friend, or your boss. Either way, you get a fancy office in a space station." "I have no interest in being Superman's lapdog," Light thought, his fingers tapping a rhythmic pattern on the table. "Superman is a hypocrite. He calls himself a savior, but he keeps the guilty alive in prisons because he's too weak to finish what he started. He wants my power because he's afraid of his own limitations." But Light was also a realist. He couldn't fight the regime and the insurgency simultaneously while remaining a student. He needed a shield. If he could convince the regime he was on their side, he would have access to their global databases, the identities of every hidden hero, every masked vigilante, every secret file Batman had ever tried to delete. His eyes drifted to the sky. He could feel a change in the air, a sudden drop in temperature, a subtle shift in the gravitational pull. Two figures were descending toward the university commons. One was a streak of gold and crimson, the other a plot of dark velvet. The students around him began to murmur, then scramble back in awe and terror.
Wonder Woman landed with the grace of a falling star, her presence commanding immediate, bowed silence. Beside her, Raven hovered, her dark eyes scanning the crowd with a terrifying, soulful intensity. Light didn't run, he didn't hide. He closed his laptop and stood up, smoothing his coat with a steady hand. This was the moment of the great gambit. He would not be found, he would be encountered. "I can feel him," Raven whispered, her gaze locking onto Light. The void, it surrounds him like a second skin. It is him. Wonder Woman stepped forward, the lasso of truth pulsing with a faint, threatening light at her hip. She looked down at the young man, her expression one of regal appraisal. "You are the one they call Kira." Light looked up at the Amazon, his face a mask of polite, academic curiosity. "That is a name the public has given to a phenomenon, Princess. I am merely a citizen who believes in the High Counselor's vision of a world without crime." "Spare us the modesty," Diana said, her voice like a sharpening blade. "Superman knows what you are. He knows what you've done. He has a proposal for you, a chance to serve the world on a scale you cannot imagine. Join us, and your judgment will become the law of the land." Light bowed his head slightly, a gesture of faint subservience that hid of burning, triumphant arrogance. "I have always admired the High Counselor's resolve. If he believes I can assist in perfecting his world, how could I refuse?" In that moment, the most dangerous alliance in history was forged. The god of strength had invited the god of death into his house. Superman thought he had gained a weapon. Light Yagami knew he had just gained the keys to the kingdom. As they rose into the air, Light looked back at the city. Batman was out there somewhere in the dark, hunting a ghost. But the ghost was now wearing a cape of legitimacy. The hunt had just become a war, and for the first time, Light could see the names of the gods written in the stars.
Section 6. The Hall of Justice was a monument to a dream that had curdled into a mandate. Its white marble columns were pristine, its vaulted ceilings echoing with the footsteps of those who walked like gods. For Light Yagami, being escorted through its corridors by Wonder Woman felt less like a recruitment and more like an ascension. He was a small, fragile human in a suit, surrounded by beings who could crack the moon, yet he felt a profound, chilling sense of superiority. They had the power of stars, but he had the power of the end. "You'll work here, in the tactical annex," Diana said, her voice echoing in the vast, sterile space. She gestured to a high-tech suite filled with holographic displays and terminal interfaces that hummed with the processing power of 1,000 supercomputers. Cyborg has partitioned a segment of the global surveillance grid specifically for your use. You will have access to everything: satellite feeds, facial recognition databases, intercepted communications from the insurgency. Superman expects results. Light sought at the central console, his fingers hovering over the haptic keys. "I understand. To cleanse the world, one must first see it clearly." From the shadows of the ceiling, Ryuk drifted down, his long, spindly fingers tracing the edge of a holographic map of Gotham. "Lots of toys, Lighto. Are you going to share? I bet I could find a lot of juicy names in those files." "Be quiet, Ryuk," Light thought, his eyes already scanning the data streams. "I don't need you to find names. I need to solve a puzzle." The puzzle was the Batman. In this universe, the identity of the Caped Crusader was the world's most dangerous secret. Superman had attempted to reveal it years ago, broadcasting the name Bruce Wayne across the planet in a fit of rage. But Batman had anticipated the move. Through a combination of experimental Wayne Tech data scrubbers and a dead man switch virus that infected the global internet, the name had been turned into a ghost. Search for Bruce Wayne and the servers returned 404 errors or redirected to propaganda loops. Digital archives of the Wayne family had been corrupted or deleted. Even the physical records in Gotham's Hall of Records had been incinerated during the early days of the regime. To the common citizen, Bruce Wayne was a myth, a billionaire who had supposedly died in the Metropolis explosion. To the regime, he was a ghost they couldn't pin down. And for the Death Note to work, Light needed more than a ghost. He needed the face and the name as they existed now. He needed the certainty of the living man behind the cowl. "Victor," Light said, his voice smooth and professional as Cyborg materialized from a digital boom tube. The half-man, half-machine hero looked at Light with a red-lensed eye that whirred as it scanned him. Cyborg's motherbox technology was sensitive to anomalies, and something about the young man sitting in his chair made the machine spirit within him uneasy. "Light Yagami, the special advisor. I've seen your work. It's clean. Too clean."
I aim for efficiency, Victor, Light replied, not looking up from the screen. I'm looking for the insurgency's primary strategist. The databases on Batman are remarkably thin. It seems he's been very thorough in his self-erasure. Cyborg leaned over the console, his metallic arms sparking with blue energy as he interfaced with the system. He's a ghost in the machine light. He's been using a decentralized network of low-tech relays and old-world radio frequencies to bypass my sensors for years. Even when we catch him on camera, his cowl uses a multi-spectrum sensor scrambler that blurs his facial features in real time. We have a name, Bruce Wayne, but we have no contemporary biometric data, no DNA that isn't 20 years old, no current image of the face under that mask. This was the hurdle. Light knew the name, but the face was a digital smear. The death note requires a clear mental image of the victim's face while writing the name to ensure that people with the same name wouldn't be affected. If he wrote Bruce Wayne while picturing a 20-year-old socialite, would it kill the battle-hardened insurgent who had spent 5 years in the shadows? The risk of failure was too high. A failed attempt would alert Batman to the exact nature of the death note's mechanics. Then we have to stop looking for him in the data, Light said, his eyes narrowing. We have to look for him in his heart. What does that mean? Cyborg asked, his mechanical eye narrowing. Batman is a creature of sentiment, Light explained, his mind weaving a web of manipulation. He fights for a world that no longer exists. He surrounds himself with family, wards, protégés, allies. He protects them because he couldn't protect his parents. If we want his face, we don't hunt him. We hunt the things he loves. Light pulled up a file on the Bat family. Most were dead or in hiding. Nightwing was dead, accidentally killed by Damian Wayne, who now serves the regime as Robin. Batgirl was a ghost, but there was one name that kept appearing in the margins of the insurgency's logistics: Catwoman, Selina Kyle. She's his constant, Light noted, his shadow. If we capture her, he will come, and when he comes for her, he won't be able to stay in the shadows. He'll have to step into the light to save her. Cyborg looked at the young man, a flicker of something like disgust crossing his human features. Cyborg's motherbox technology was sensitive to anomalies, and something about the young man sitting in his chair made the machine spirit within him uneasy. Light Yagami, the special advisor. I've seen your work. It's clean. Too clean. I aim for efficiency, Victor, Light replied, not looking up from the screen. I'm looking for the insurgency's primary strategist. The databases on Batman are remarkably thin. It seems he's been very thorough in his self-erasure. Cyborg looked at the console, his metallic arms sparking with blue energy as he interfaced with the system. He's a ghost in the machine light. He's been using a decentralized network of low-tech relays and old-world radio frequencies to bypass my sensors for years. Even when we catch him on camera, his cowl uses a multi-spectrum sensor scrambler that blurs his facial features in real time. We have a name, Bruce Wayne, but we have no contemporary biometric data, no DNA that isn't 20 years old, no current image of the face under that mask. This was the hurdle. Light knew the name, but the face was a digital smear. The death note requires a clear mental image of the victim's face while writing the name to ensure that people with the same name wouldn't be affected. If he wrote Bruce Wayne while picturing a 20-year-old socialite, would it kill the battle-hardened insurgent who had spent 5 years in the shadows? The risk of failure was too high. A failed attempt would alert Batman to the exact nature of the death note's mechanics. Then we have to stop looking for him in the data, Light said, his eyes narrowing. We have to look for him in his heart. What does that mean? Cyborg asked, his mechanical eye narrowing. Batman is a creature of sentiment, Light explained, his mind weaving a web of manipulation. He fights for a world that no longer exists. He surrounds himself with family, wards, protégés, allies. He protects them because he couldn't protect his parents. If we want his face, we don't hunt him. We hunt the things he loves. Light pulled up a file on the Bat family. Most were dead or in hiding. Nightwing was dead, accidentally killed by Damian Wayne, who now serves the regime as Robin. Batgirl was a ghost, but there was one name that kept appearing in the margins of the insurgency's logistics: Catwoman, Selina Kyle. She's his constant, Light noted, his shadow. If we capture her, he will come, and when he comes for her, he won't be able to stay in the shadows. He'll have to step into the light to save her. Cyborg looked at the young man, a flicker of something like disgust crossing his human features. Cyborg's motherbox technology was sensitive to anomalies, and something about the young man sitting in his chair made the machine spirit within him uneasy. Light Yagami, the special advisor. I've seen your work. It's clean. Too clean. I aim for efficiency, Victor, Light replied, not looking up from the screen. I'm looking for the insurgency's primary strategist. The databases on Batman are remarkably thin. It seems he's been very thorough in his self-erasure. Cyborg leaned over the console, his metallic arms sparking with blue energy as he interfaced with the system. He's a ghost in the machine light. He's been using a decentralized network of low-tech relays and old-world radio frequencies to bypass my sensors.
The Watchtower was not merely a military fortress. It was the heart of a new civilization. In its sprawling civilian sectors, the elite of the One Earth society gathered to celebrate the progress of their utopia. The Global Vanguard Gala was a display of peak human achievement under the regime's guidance, a sea of pristine white uniforms, shimmering evening gowns, and the heavy, intoxicating scent of artificial lilies. Light Yagami, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that blended perfectly with the high society crowd, moved through the gala with the practiced ease of a predator in a flock of sheep. He was no longer just the special advisor. He was the keynote speaker for the Global Vanguard, the regime's premier youth organization, dedicated to purity, discipline, and the maintenance of the New World Order. To the young men and women who looked up to him, Light was the embodiment of Superman's ideal, brilliant, composed, and utterly devoted to the cause. But to Light, these were his first disciples. He was building a cult of personality within the regime's own house, a network of eyes and ears that reported not to the High Counselor, but to the ghost of Kira. "You're a natural at this, Light-O," Ryuk whispered, hovering upside down from a crystal chandelier, his yellow eyes reflecting the sparkling champagne below. "It's hilarious. They have no idea they're bowing to a serial killer." "I am not a killer, Ryuk," Light thought, his smile never reaching his eyes as he shook hands with the daughter of a prominent metropolis senator. "I am a gardener, and a gardener must pull the weeds, even if they grow in the royal garden." As he moved toward the balcony, his mind was busy with a secondary task. While his public persona charmed the guests, his digital presence was deep diving into the Watchtower's restricted archives. He had planted a logic bomb within the Global Vanguard's membership portal, a sleeper virus that was currently scraping the biometric data of every person who had ever entered Wayne Manor before the fall. But there was another purge happening tonight. Light reached into his inner pocket, his fingers brushing the cool, leathery texture of the Death Note. He had identified a leak in the regime's upper echelons, Commander Holloway, the man in charge of the Gotham Reconstruction Project. Holloway was a loyalist on paper, but Light's Vanguard had discovered he was taking bribes from Intergang to look the other way while they trafficked kryptonite-laced weapons to the city's ruins. To Superman, Holloway was a useful tool. To Kira, he was a stain on the New World's canvas. Light found a quiet corner near the observation window, the earth hanging like a blue jewel below. He pulled a small silver fountain pen from his pocket. He didn't need to see Holloway tonight. He had seen the man's face on the gala's guest list earlier. Marcus Holloway, accidental fall, 22:15. Light checked his watch. It was 22:12. He returned the pen to his pocket and turned back to the gala, only to find a shadow blocking his path. "You're far away, Yagami," a voice said, sharp and cold as a winter morning. Light looked up into the mask of Damian Wayne. The current Robin, son of Batman and grandson of Ra's al Ghul, stood with his arms crossed, his posture radiating a predatory suspicion. Damian was one of the few who didn't buy the heroic student act. He had been raised by assassins. He knew the smell of blood, even when it was hidden on expensive cologne. "Just admiring the view, Damian," Light said, his voice smooth as silk. "It's rare to see the world so clearly. No borders, no conflict, just order." Damian stepped closer, his green eyes narrowing behind his domino mask. "My father used to talk about order. He called it a necessary fiction. He said that the moment you believe you've achieved perfect order, you've actually just built a very efficient tomb." Damian's hand drifted toward the hilt of his katana. "I've been watching your Vanguard. You're teaching them to look for impurities. That's a dangerous word, Yagami. It sounds like something my grandfather would say." "Your grandfather wanted to reset the world through mass slaughter," countered Light, his tone one of mild academic debate. "I want to preserve it through accountability. There's a difference." "Is there?" Damian's voice dropped to a whisper. "I've seen the reports on the deaths in the metropolis sectors. They're happening faster now, and they're hitting people inside the regime, people who aren't even on Superman's enemies list." At that moment, a muffled shout erupted from the other side of the gala. A group of guests had rushed toward the balcony. Light remained perfectly still. Damian, however, spun around, his hand moving to his comms. "Code Blue on the West Terrace," a security officer shouted. "Commander Holloway he just tripped over the railing. He's gone. He's in the vacuum." The panic was instantaneous. The pristine order of the gala shattered into a chaotic scramble of guards and screaming socialites. Damian looked from the balcony back to Light, his expression one of dawning, horrific clarity. He was standing 10 feet away from the railing, Damian whispered, his sword clearing its scabbard by an inch. "I watched him. He didn't trip. He walked to the edge and stepped over like he was in a trance." "A tragic accident," Light said, his face a mask of shocked concern. "The pressure of the reconstruction must have been too much for him." "You're lying," Damian growled, stepping into Light's personal space. "I don't know how you're doing it, but I see you. You're not a student. You're a monster. You're the one my father is looking for." "If that were true, Damian," Light said, leaning in so only the boy could hear him, "wouldn't your father have stopped me by now? Or perhaps he's waiting for me to do what he never could, to truly
truly end the rot. Damien's eyes flared with rage, but before he could act, a massive, booming presence landed on the terrace. Superman arrived. The High Counselor's cape billowed like a shroud of blood as he surveyed the scene. His X-ray vision scanned the drifting body of Holloway in the void outside, his expression unreadable. "Robin," Superman commanded, his voice shaking the very floorboards. "Secure the perimeter. No one leaves the watchtower until we've analyzed the security footage." Light stood among the terrified elite, the image of the perfect, grieving citizen. But inside, he was reeling. He had just realized something terrifying. The message Batman had sent him, "I see you," hadn't been a bluff. As the watchtower's alarms blared, I saw a flicker on a nearby security monitor. It wasn't a glitch. It was a sequence of code that he recognized from his own Vanguard portal. Batman hadn't just bypassed the firewalls. He was using Light's own network to hide. The Vanguard, Light's pride and joy, was being turned into a Trojan horse. Every name Light had collected, every face he had scanned, was now being funneled directly to the insurgency. Light looked at the High Counselor, who was now questioning the guards. Superman thought he was the master of this house. Light thought he was the god of this world. But in the shadows of the very machine they had built to control the planet, the Batman was already rewriting the ending. Light had wanted to hunt the Bat, but as he stood in the cold, artificial light of the watchtower, he realized he had invited the world's greatest detective into his own mind. The checkmate hadn't been Light's, it had been Bruce's, and the game was far from over.
Section 8. The lockdown of the watchtower was a symphony of red strobe lights and the rhythmic thud of blast doors sealing shut. While regime security teams scrambled to analyze the accidental death of Commander Holloway, Light Yagami retreated to his private quarters in the high-security residential wing. He needed a moment of absolute silence to recalibrate. Batman's digital shadow was inside his networks, Damian Wayne was breathing down his neck, and Superman's patience was a fraying tether. But as Light sat at his desk, the air in the room didn't just grow cold, it died. The hum of the watchtower's life support systems vanished, replaced by a silence so heavy it felt underwater. Ryuk, who usually spent his time lounging on the ceiling, suddenly scrambled into the corner, his yellow eyes wide with a genuine primal fear. "Lighto," the Shinigami hissed, his voice trembling. "This isn't good. Something big is here. Something that doesn't belong in the world of the living or the dead." A mist began to bleed from the vents, a thick, emerald-green fog that smelled of ancient parchment and ozone. It coalesced in the center of the room, rising until it took the shape of a towering figure, draped in a tattered, moss-colored cloak. The face was a pale, expressionless mask of divine fury, and the eyes were twin pits of white, judgmental fire. "Light Yagami," the voice boomed, not through the air, but directly into Light's marrow. "You have played with the threads of the Moirai. You have usurped the balance of the presence." Light stood his ground, his hand surreptitiously slipping into his pocket to touch the death note. He had faced gods of steel and princesses of war, but this was different. This was the specter, the spirit of vengeance, the literal wrath of the Almighty. In the DC universe, the specter was the ultimate arbiter of sin. "I don't know who you are," Light said, his voice a masterpiece of forced composure. "But this is a restricted area of the One Earth government. If you have a grievance, you should take it up with the High Counselor." "Superman is a mortal drunk on the dregs of power," the specter thundered, the room shaking as if hit by a meteor. "He kills with his hands, and for that he will face his own reckoning. But you kill with a curse. You have opened a gate to a realm of nothingness that was never meant to touch this reality. Every name you write is a soul stolen from the cycle of judgment. You are an anomaly, a cancer on the spirit breath of the universe." Light's mind raced. He realized the Death Note's greatest weakness in this universe. It didn't just kill, it bypassed the natural laws of life and death that the cosmic entities of DC protected. To the Spectre, Light wasn't a criminal, he was a metaphysical vandal. "You speak of balance," Light countered, his eyes narrowing as he leaned into his god complex. "But look at the world you left behind. Before the regime, before Kira, there was only chaos. Millions died in Gotham. Metropolis was turned to ash. Where was your vengeance then? Where was your divine judgment when the Joker was laughing over the bodies of children?" The Spectre leaned forward, the green mist swirling violently. "The Joker's soul is in the pit. His path was written. Your path is a forgery.
"It is a better story," Light shouted, his mask of the polite student finally cracking. "I am doing what your presence refused to do. I am ending this cycle of evil. If you take me now, you return the world to the darkness. You allow the insurgency to bomb cities. You allow the corrupt to thrive. Is that your justice? To protect the status quo of misery because my method is unnatural?" The specter raised a massive translucent hand. The air around Light began to glow with an agonizing green light. He felt his very soul being pulled towards the surface of his skin, every lie he had ever told, every drop of blood his pen had spilled, being weighed on a cosmic scale. "The cost of your order is the hollowed heart of humanity," the specter judged. "You seek to be a god, but you are merely a ghost who has found a louder scream. I shall cast you into the void between worlds, where your names have no power." "Wait." The door to the quarters hissed open. Raven stepped inside, her hands glowing with black, soul-chilling energy. Behind her stood Wonder Woman, her sword drawn. Superman's enforcers had felt the surge of magical energy. "Spectre," Raven said, her voice a calm, dark monotone. "The High Counselor has placed this man under protection of the regime. He is a vital asset to the peace of this world." The specter turned his terrifying gaze toward Raven. "Daughter of Trigon, you of all beings should know the stench of the abyss that follows this boy. He is a harbinger of a silence that will swallow even your father's hell." "I see the void," Raven admitted, her eyes flickering, "but I also see the results. The souls he takes are the ones who made this world a nightmare. If his power is an anomaly, then perhaps it is the one the universe needs to finally find balance." "You would defend a murderer," the specter roared. "We defend order." Wonder Woman stepped forward, her golden lasso glowing. "The regime does not recognize your jurisdiction, Spirit. If you want him, you have to go through us." The specter stood silent for a moment, the emerald mist pulsing with a rhythmic thunderous heat. He looked at Light, who stood shivering but defiant. Then the spirit of vengeance began to fade, his form dissolving back into the fog. "Very well," the specter's voice whispered, a chilling promise that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "The regime has chosen its weapon, but know this, Light Yagami, the death note has a price that even Superman cannot pay. When the last name is written and the silence falls, I will be waiting, and there will be no goddesses or half-demons to stand between us." As the mist vanished and the watchtower's lights flickered back to life, Light collapsed into his chair, gasping for air. Ryuk drifted back over to him, looking uncharacteristically somber. "That was close, Light," the Shinigami said. "I've never seen the specter up close. He's right, you know. This world's god is a lot more hands-on than the ones I'm used to." Light didn't answer. He stared at his hands, which were still shaking. He had survived a confrontation with a cosmic entity, but the victory felt like a stay of execution. He realized now that he wasn't just fighting Batman or Superman. He was fighting the very fabric of the DC Universe's morality. "Is the security footage of this encounter suppressed?" "I've shrouded this room in darkness," Raven replied, her eyes lingering on the death note sitting on the desk. "But Light, even I am beginning to fear what you've brought into this world." "Fear is the beginning of wisdom, Raven said, his composure returning as his heart hardened. "Batman is still out there, and now I know that the universe itself is trying to stop me. That only means I have to work faster." He picked up his pen. He had been looking for Batman's name, but after facing the specter, he realized he needed something more. He needed to eliminate the one man who could bridge the gap between the physical and the spiritual. He needed to find the man who had been whispering to Batman about the unnatural nature of Kira. He pulled up the files on the insurgency's mystical consultants. One name stood out, John Constantine. Light smiled, a cold, predatory expression. "If the specter wants to play the judge, I'll give him someone worth judging." He began to write, his hands steady once more. The battle of wills had escalated. It was no longer a game of detectives and kings. It was a war for the soul of the multiverse, and Light Yagami was ready to write the ending.
The interrogation chamber was a box of reinforced promethium, buried miles beneath the Hall of Justice, and shielded from every frequency known to man. It was a place where hope was systematically disassembled. In the center of the room, strapped into a kinetic dampening chair, was Selina Kyle. Her leather suit was scorched, her mask torn, but her eyes, sharp and defiant, never wavered from the young man standing before her. Light Yagami didn't look like a torturer. He didn't carry a branding iron or a shock prod. He carried a leather-bound notebook and a silver pen. "He won't come for me, kid," Selina spat, a trickle of blood running down her chin. "Bruce knows the stakes. He won't trade the world's freedom for one cat." "You underestimate his sentimentality, Selina," Light replied, his voice calm, almost sympathetic. "And you underestimate my patience. I don't need him to burst through that door. I just need him to look at you. Because when he looks at you, his scrambler has to work overtime to protect his identity from the cameras I've recalibrated, and I only need one clear frame." Light had played his hand perfectly. He had convinced Superman that Selina was the key to breaking the insurgency's morale, but in reality, Light was using the regime's vast resources to bypass Batman's ultimate defense. He had installed a Kira-level subroutine into the Watchtower's optical sensors, a program designed to piece together fragmented biometric data through sheer brute force processing. "You're a sick little freak," Selina whispered. "Superman is a tyrant, but at least he thinks he's doing the right thing. You just want to be the one holding the leash. I am the one who ensures the leash is never needed again, Light countered. He turned to a secondary terminal, where Ryuk was lounging attempting attack of high-security servers. Hey, Light out, Ryuk chuckled, pointing a long claw at a flickering monitor. The big bat is finally in the vents. He's bypassed the first 3 layers of the hall security. He's faster than I thought. Light didn't flinch. Good. Let him get close. Light opened the death note. On a previous page, he had already written the name of a high-ranking regime guard, Officer Miller. Officer Miller enters the interrogation chamber at 3 a.m., disables the internal audio recorders, and initiates a manual override of the visual scrambler before dying of a heart attack at 3:05. The door hissed open. Officer Miller walked in, his eyes glazed and vacant, his movements robotic. Under the thrall of the Death Note's circumstances of death, he was a puppet on Light's string. Miller walked to the main console, his fingers dancing across the keys with a proficiency he shouldn't have possessed. "What are you doing to him?" Selena asked, her voice trembling for the first time. "I'm ensuring the truth is seen," Light said. On the massive holographic display above Selena, the visual feed of the hallway outside the chamber began to clear. The static of Batman's scrambler, the digital ghosting that blurred his features, began to peel away like old paint. A figure was moving through the shadows, a specter of vengeance draped in tattered scallops of cape. Batman was 20 feet away. "Now," Light commanded. Officer Miller slammed his palm onto the emergency override. In the hallway, a burst of high-intensity white light, a biometric flash, erupted. It was designed to overwhelm any electronic interference. For 1/50th of a second, the scrambler failed. On Light's screen, the image froze. The mask was still there, but the chin, the jawline, the specific architecture of the bone, and the deep, weary blue of the eyes were captured in crystalline detail. Light's Vanguard algorithm instantly cross-referenced the image with the historical archives of the 1% from pre-regime Gotham. A name appeared in bold green letters: Bruce Wayne, match, 99.9%. "Checkmate," Light whispered. At that exact moment, the Prometheum door exploded inward. A smoke pellet detonated, filling the room with thick, gray fog. Batman lunged from the gloom, a blur of kinetic energy. He didn't go for Light, he went for the terminal. With a single precision-weighted batarang, he shattered the central processor, incinerating the data Light had just harvested. But the data didn't matter anymore. Light had the image burned into his mind. He had the name. Batman stood over Selena, his cape shielding her. He turned his head toward Light, the white lenses of his cowl narrowing. "It's over, Yagami. Your Vanguard network is dark. I've uploaded a virus that will delete the Death Note's digital footprints from every regime server. You're exposed. Superman will realize you've been killing your own officers." "You think I care about his servers?" Light laughed, a high, chilling sound that echoed in the small room. He held up the leathery black notebook. "I don't need a computer, Bruce. I don't even need this room." Batman froze at the mention of his name. The air in the chamber became frigid. "I know you," Light said, his voice dropping to a low, predatory purr. "I know the boy who watched his parents die in Crime Alley. I know the man who built a cave to hide his grief. And I know the face you see in the mirror when you think you failed. Bruce Wayne." Light uncapped his pen. His hand was steady, his heart rate as calm as a summer lake. "You spent years fighting to keep your identity a secret because you knew it was the only thing that could kill the Batman. You were right." He began to write. "BRUCE. Light, don't," Selena screamed. Batman didn't move. He didn't plead. He simply reached into his utility belt and pulled out a small, lead-lined cylinder. "You're right, Light. My name is my greatest weakness, but your arrogance is yours." Batman thumbed a switch on the cylinder. A high-frequency pulse, a neural disruptor designed by Lex Luthor, blasted through the room. It wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to scramble the brain's motor functions for precisely 5 seconds. Light's hand jerked. The pen skidded across the page, leaving a jagged, illegible ink stain. He gasped, his knees buckling as his nervous system misfired. The notebook slipped from his fingers, sliding across the floor toward the shadows. "Ryuk," Light choked out. "Get the book." But Ryuk was nowhere to be seen. The Shinigami had vanished into the walls the moment the pulse went off, his laughter echoing in the vents. "Sorry, Lighto. I told you, I'm just an observer, and this is getting really interesting." By the time Light regained control of his limbs, Batman was gone. The chair where Selena had been was empty, the restraints cut with surgical precision. The room was silent, save for the hum of the dying servers. Light scrambled for the notebook, his fingers clutching the leather cover. He flipped the page. It was ruined. The name was a mess of black ink, invalidating the kill. He knew, Light whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of rage and terror. He had the name, but Batman had the escape, and worse, Batman had the proof. Light looked at the broken terminal. He had used a regime officer to facilitate the kill. Superman will be here soon. The High Counselor didn't tolerate traitors, and he certainly didn't tolerate rivals, and he used his own men as pawns. Light Yagami, the god of the new world, was no longer the hunter. He was a rat in a cage of his own making. But as he looked at the Death Note, a new, darker thought occurred to him. If he couldn't kill the Bat tonight, he would kill the world that the Bat was trying to save. He would write a name that even Superman couldn't ignore. He would bring the sky down on all of that. The promethium walls of the chamber didn't just rattle, they groaned as if the very atoms were screaming in protest. The air became a pressurized solid, smelling of ozone and the cold, metallic scent of a dying star. Then, the ceiling simply ceased to exist. It wasn't smashed, it was vaporized by two twin beams of solar fire that cut through miles of earth and reinforced concrete in a heartbeat. Superman descended through the jagged hole, his red cape trailing behind him like a river of blood. He didn't land, he hovered inches above the scorched floor, his eyes glowing with a smoldering, terrifying heat that made the darkness of the room seem absolute. "You used my men." Superman's voice was a tectonic shift, a sound that vibrated Light's teeth in his skull. "You turned my Hall of Justice into your personal slaughterhouse. You weren't cleaning the world, Light. You were competing with me." Light Yagami stood in the center of the ruin, his suit dusty, his hair disheveled, but his eyes were wide with a manic, crystalline clarity. He clutched the death note to his chest, his knuckles white. He looked up at the Man of Steel, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel fear. He felt a profound, exhilarating contempt. "I wasn't competing, Clark," Light said, the use of the secret name hitting the room like a physical blow. Superman's eyes flickered, the heat vision dimming for a fraction of a second in shock. "I was finishing your work. You built a world of cages and called it peace. I built a world of consequences and called it justice. You ruled under the fear of your fist, but I ruled through the fear of the soul." Superman's feet finally touched the ground. He stepped toward Light, the floor cracking beneath his boots. "Your justice is a notebook and a pen. It's a coward's weapon. I have tolerated your presence because I thought you understood the burden of power, but you're just a boy who found a way to play God without ever having to bleed for it. And you're just an alien who thinks a cape makes him a king," Light screamed, his composure finally shattering into the jagged shards of his ego. He flipped the death note open, his pen poised. "You think you're invulnerable? You think your alien biology protects you from the fundamental laws of the universe? The Spectre called this a curse, Clark, and curses don't care about yellow suns." Superman moved. He was faster than a speeding bullet, faster than the blink of an eye. But the death note was magic, and magic in the DC universe moved at the speed of thought. As Superman's hand reached for Light's throat, Light's pen struck the paper. He didn't write Superman. He didn't even write Kal-El. He wrote the name that the man truly identified with, the name that carried the weight of his humanity and his fall. Clark Kent. The effect was instantaneous. Superman's hand froze inches from Light's windpipe. A massive, invisible weight seemed to slam into the High Counselor's chest. The magic of the Death Note, the metaphysical severance of the soul, didn't interact with his Kryptonian cells. It interacted with his life force. Superman gasped, his knees buckling as his heart, a muscle capable of pumping the blood of a god, stuttered and seized. What have you?" Superman choked out, a thin trail of blood leaking from his nose. His invulnerability was a physical shield, but it offered no protection against a conceptual attack. The notebook didn't have to break his skin, it just had to end his story. "I told you," Light hissed, leaning in close as the most powerful being on Earth collapsed before him. "It's a scalpel. I'm writing the ending of the regime, Clark. I'm writing the end of the tyrant who forgot he was a man." But Light had forgotten one thing. He was in a universe where the line between hero and monster was drawn in blood. Behind him, the shadows of the room stirred. "Light, look out!" Ryuk's voice cackled from the darkness. A batarang, coated in a specialized lead polymer, whistled through the air. It didn't strike Light. It struck the Death Note, slicing through the leathery cover and pinning the book to the scorched wall. Batman emerged from the smoke of the earlier explosion, his face a mask of grim determination. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood the remnants of the insurgency, Cyborg, whose systems had been purged by a Mother Box reboot, and Raven, her eyes glowing with white light. "The book is a tether, Bruce," Raven shouted, her voice echoing with the power of the Azarath. "If the soul isn't taken within 40 seconds, the magic dissipates. We have to break the connection." Batman didn't hesitate. He lunged for the wall, but Light was faster. Driven by a desperate feral energy, Light tackled the Dark Knight, his fingers clawing at the cowl. "No,"
I am the god of this world. You won't take it from me. It was a pathetic sight. A brilliant student wrestling with a master martial artist in the ruins of a god's palace. Batman threw Light off with a single practiced strike, but as he turned to retrieve the notebook, he saw Superman rising. The Man of Steel was pale, his breathing labored, but the 40 seconds had passed. The heart attack had passed. He stood up, his eyes no longer glowing with heat, but with a cold, murderous vacuum. He looked at the death note pinned to the wall. He looked at Light, who was crawling toward it, and he looked at Batman. No more, Superman whispered. He didn't use his hate vision. He didn't use his strength. He used his cold breath, freezing the death note into a block of absolute zero ice. Then, with a flick of his anger, he shattered it into a million black shards. The silence that followed was deafening. The death note was gone. The supernatural bridge between the human world and the Shinigami realm had been severed. Light Yagami let out a long, haunting wail of despair. He slumped against the wall, his hands crawling at the dust of his godhood. Without the notebook, he was just a boy in a ruined suit. Ryuk appeared one last time, hovering over the broken student. "Well, Lighto," the Shinigami said, his voice fading as his connection to this reality withered. "It was a hell of a show, but you were right. This world already has enough monsters, and they don't need a book to finish what they started. See ya." Ryuk vanished into the ether. Superman stood over Light, his hand trembling with the remnants of the magical heart attack. He looked like he was about to incinerate the boy where he sat, but Batman stepped between them. "If you kill him, Clark, you prove him right," Bruce said, his voice heavy with the exhaustion of 1,000 wars. "He wanted a world of absolute judgment. Don't give it to him." Superman looked at his former friend, then back at the broken boy on the floor. For a moment, the High Counselor hovered on the edge of a final, total darkness. Then, he turned and flew upward, disappearing into the night sky of Metropolis. The insurgency took Light Yagami. They didn't kill him. They placed him in a cell in a location so secret, not even Superman could find it. He was given a pen and a stack of ordinary paper. He spent his days writing names, thousands of names, waiting for the heart attacks that would never come. The world of the injustice regime remained. Superman's grip tightened, the fear of Kira making him even more paranoid, even more absolute. Batman's resistance continued, a flicker of hope in a darkening world. But the legend of the unseen judge endured. In the slums of Gotham and the high-rises of Metropolis, people still looked at the sky and wondered if someone, somewhere, was watching with a pen. Light Yagami had failed to become a god, but he had succeeded in one thing. He had reminded the gods that they could bleed. And in a world of tyrants and heroes, that was the most dangerous truth of all. Conclusion. The Kira incident became a dark chapter in the history of the One Earth regime, a reminder of the day a mortal almost unmade the gods. Light Yagami remained a ghost to the cell, his brilliant mind fracturing under the weight of his lost divinity. He had sought to perfect the world through death, only to discover that in a universe defined by the struggle between hope and despair, death was merely a transition, not an end. Superman was forever changed by the stutter in his heart, his fear of the unseen driving the regime into an even deeper era of surveillance. Batman, ever the detective, kept a single shard of the frozen notebook in a lead-lined box in the Batcave, a reminder of the boy who thought he was a judge. The Spectre's warning remained, the balance had been disturbed, and the vacuum left by the Death Note's destruction began to draw the attention of darker things from the multiverse. The war between the regime and the insurgency would continue, but the shadow of Kira would always linger, a whisper in the dark that even the Man of Steel could not silence. Hope shines brightest in the